Assassin's Creed Brotherhood by Oliver Bowden. Part 1. Yet it cannot be called prowess to kill fellow citizens, to betray friends, to be treacherous, pitiless, irreligious. These ways can win a prince power, but never glory. Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince. Chapter 1. Ezio stood for a moment, dazed and disoriented. Where was he? What was this place? As he slowly regained his senses, he saw his Uncle Mario detach himself from the group of his fellow assassins and approach him, taking his arm. Ezio, are you all right? There was a fight with the Pope, with Rodrigo Borgia. I left him for dead. Ezio trembled violently. He could not help himself. Could it be real? Minutes earlier, though it seemed like 100 years ago, he had been involved in a life-and-death struggle with the man he most hated and feared, the leader of the Templars. The vicious organization bent on the destruction of the world Ezio and his friends in the Brotherhood of the Assassins had fought so hard to protect. But he had beaten them. He had used the great powers of the mysterious artifact, the apple, the sacred piece of Eden vouchsafed to him by the old gods, to ensure that their investment in humanity did not vanish in bloodshed and iniquity. And he had emerged triumphant. Or had he? What had he said? I left him for dead. And indeed, Rodrigo Borgia, the vile old man who had clawed his way to the head of the church and ruled it as Pope, had indeed seemed to be dying. He had taken poison. But now a hideous doubt gripped Ezio. In showing mercy which was at the core of the Assassin's Creed, and which should, he knew, be granted to all but those whose life would endanger the rest of mankind, had he in fact been weak? If he had, he would never let his doubt show, not even to his Uncle Mario, leader of the Brotherhood. He squared his shoulders. He had left the old man to die by his own hand. He had left him with time to pray. He had not stabbed him through the heart to make sure of him. A cold hand closed over his heart, as a clear voice in his mind said, "You should have killed him." He took himself to get rid of his demons, as a dog shakes off water after a swim. But still his thoughts dwelt on his mystifying experience in the strange vault beneath the Sistine Chapel in Rome's Vatican, the building from which he had just emerged into the blinking, unfamiliar sunlight. Everything around him seemed strangely calm and normal. The buildings of the Vatican stood, just as they always had, resplendent in the bright light. The memory of what had just passed in the vault came back to him. Great surges of recollection, overwhelming his consciousness. There had been a vision, an encounter with a strange goddess, for there was no other way of describing the being, whom he now knew as Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. She had shown him both the distant past and the far future, in such a way as to make him loathe the responsibility that the knowledge he had gained placed on his shoulders. With whom could he share it? How could he explain any of it? It all seemed so unreal. All he knew for sure after his experience, better to call it an ordeal, was that the fight was not yet over. Perhaps one day there would be a time when he could return to his hometown of Florence and settle down with his books, drinking with his friends in winter and hunting with them in autumn, chasing girls in spring and overseeing the harvests on his estates in summer. But this was not it. In his heart he knew that the Templars and all the evil they represented were not finished. In them he was pitted against a monster with more heads than the Hydra, and, like that beast, which it had taken no less than a man than Hercules to slay, all but immortal. Ezio! His uncle's voice was harsh, but served to make him snap out of the reverie that had held him in its clutches. He had to get a grip and think clearly. There was a fire raging in Ezio's head. He said his name to himself as a kind of reassurance. I am Ezio Auditore de Firenze, strong, a master of the traditions of the assassin. He went over the ground again. He didn't know whether or not he'd been dreaming. The teaching and the revelations of the strange goddess in the vault had shaken his beliefs and assumptions to the core. It was as if time itself had been stood on its head. Emerging from the Sistine Chapel, where he had left the evil Pope, apparently dying, he squinted again in the harsh sunlight. His fellow assassins were gathered around, their faces grave and set with a grim determination. The thought pursued him still. Should he have killed Rodrigo? Made sure of him? He had elected not to, and the man had seemed bent on taking his own life, having failed in his final goal. But that clear voice still rang in Ezio's mind. And there was more. A baffling force seemed to be drawing him back to the chapel. He sensed that there was something left undone. Not Rodrigo. Not just Rodrigo. Though he would finish him now. Something else. What is it? Mario asked. I must return, Ezio said, realizing afresh and with a lurching stomach that the game wasn't over, and that the apple should not yet pass from his hands. As a thought struck him, so he was seized by an overwhelming sense of urgency. Tearing himself free of his uncle's sheltering arms, he hurried back into the gloom. Mario, bidding the others to stay where they were and keep watch, followed. Ezio quickly reached the place where he'd left the dying Rodrigo Borgia. But the man wasn't there. A richly decorated damask cope lay in a heap on the floor, flecked with gore, but its owner was gone. Once again the hand, clad in an icy steel gauntlet, closed over Ezio's heart, and seemed to crush it. The hidden door to the vault was, to all intents and purposes, closed and almost invisible. But as Ezio approached the point where he remembered it, it swung open gently at his touch. He turned to his uncle and was surprised to see fear on Mario's face. "What's in there?" said the older man, fighting to keep his voice steady. "The mystery," Ezio replied. Leaving Mario on the threshold, he walked down the dimly lit passage, hoping he was not too late, and that Minerva would have foreseen this, and therefore show mercy. Surely Rodrigo would not have been allowed entry here. Nevertheless, Ezio kept his hidden blade, the blade his father had bequeathed him, at the ready. In the vault, the great human, yet at the same time superhuman figures, were they statues, stood holding the staff. One of the pieces of Eden. The staff was apparently welded to the figure that held it, and as Ezio tried to pry it loose, the figure seemed to glow and tighten its grip, as did the runic inscriptions on the walls of the vault. Ezio remembered that no human hand should ever touch the apple unprotected. The figures then turned away and sank into the ground, leaving the vault void of anything save the great sarcophagus and its surrounding statues. Ezio stepped back, looking round briefly and hesitating before taking what he instinctively knew would be his final leave of the place. What was he expecting? Was he hoping that Minerva would once more manifest herself to him? But hadn't she told him all there was to tell? Or at least all that it was safe for him to know? The apple had been vouchsafed him. In combination with the apple, The other pieces of Eden would have accorded Rodrigo the supremacy he craved. And Ezio understood in the fullness of his years that such united power was too dangerous for the hands of man. "All right?" Mario's voice, still untypically nervous, floated down to him. "All's well," replied Ezio, making his way back to the light with a curious reluctance. Once reunited with his uncle, Ezio wordlessly showed him the apple. "And the staff?" Ezio shook his head. "Better in the hands of the earth than in the hands of man," said Mario with immediate understanding. "But you don't need me to tell you that. Come on, we shouldn't linger." "What's the hurry?" "Everything's the hurry. Do you think Rodrigo is just going to sit back and let us stroll out of here? I left him for dead. Not quite the same as leaving him good and dead, is it? Come on." They made their way out of the vault as quickly as they could, and a cold wind seemed to follow them as they did so.